Hey, I am Greg Atkinson. I'm here with Ben Stapley from Christ Fellowship in Miami. And we both have similar experiences and hearts and desires and passions around the area of soul care, self care, burnout. And I'm just sensing with Ben, it really stems from a pastor's heart. And we are in some crazy, unprecedented times. I know you hear that word a lot these days. Unprecedented get thrown around all the time, but it's exhausting. It's exhausting with what we're having to do as as individuals, as parents, homeschooling, work, unemployment, stressed out, maxed out, burned out. It's exhausting time. So I saw Ben post a thing on his Facebook wall that said, "Church leaders, try to stick to a regular day off during the season of social distancing for your sake and for the sake of those in your care." And I just messaged or just commented on his Facebook and said, "Hey, let's talk about it. Let's do a webinar and talk about this issue." And so, Ben, welcome. Thanks for doing this.
Greg, thanks for having me here. It's a conversation that I know I need to talk about, but more importantly, I need to hear and apply because I've been behind the curve on this one. To be honest, I haven't done a good job on this as well.
Yeah, I think we're all guilty of that. I was on staff at Transformation Church in Charlotte with Derwin Gray, and they're all about the Great Commandment. And they end every service with upward, inward, outward. They talk about love God and love your neighbor as you love yourself. But the way they describe loving yourself is differently than a lot of times I've heard it interpreted, and that is actually self-love, self-care. Love yourself so that you can love your neighbor. And so that's something that you and I were talking about off camera. Give me some thoughts about self-care and soul care as the pastor, as the church leader, as an individual, before we start talking about how we could care and shepherd those that are under our care, volunteers and things like that.
Yeah, so I'll bring this conversation to the forefront as to why we need to have this conversation is because just that. Oftentimes as ministry leaders, church leaders, we've been trained, we've been schooled, we've been educated, and our model of ministry is care for others, which is great. But if we're not caring for ourselves, we can't do that well. And I think a lot of leaders got caught behind the 8 ball on this as we moved into this pandemic. They were not caring for themselves. I say that me, were not caring for themselves, and they were getting run down and then facing a crisis of having to care for other people out of a depletion. Again, to be completely honest, I did this for about 4 weeks, didn't take a day off, and my body shut down on me. And I got incredibly sick, so sick I thought I had the virus. I had to get tested for it. Thankfully, I don't and didn't. But that's where I was as a leader, because I was not caring for myself. I was not in a position to care for myself as well. So there was a bit of a wake-up call, and I think other leaders are going through that as well. And that's why the need to have this conversation here is to care for yourself first so that you're in a position to care for other people.
Yeah. I remember I was the director of xpastors.com, which is a nonprofit dealing with hurting, burned out, frustrated, tired pastors. You could be a current pastor or a former pastor, ex pastor. But we did a lot of articles and a lot of work with hurting, tired, burned out pastors, and have a network of counselors that did Zoom counseling just like this, and would meet with pastors privately in Zoom. And we were doing this, 3 years ago, meeting with pastors and helping them. And every year at xpastors.com, we would do an annual survey just to touch base and get a pulse on what pastors are struggling with and what is causing this burnout. And one of the answers that has stuck with me for the last 3 years and just haunted me was this unrealistic expectations. They talked about the cause of burnout being directly linked to expectations. And so as we are in this crazy season of COVID-19 and coronavirus, and pastors are having to scramble, a lot of people, I remember years ago, you did some some recordings and webinars. You did one for my conference and for some other conferences, and spoke at some conferences about online host and online church. And you guys have been in the digital world for a while, but a lot of people had to scramble last minute. And so their workload and their work hours had to be off the charts to go from 0 to 60 all of a sudden, and to go from a non-existent digital online church to having online church. And so speak just a little bit to that reality of these expectations that get thrown on leaders and how it can affect our mental health and our ability to even self-regulate and self-care.
Yeah, the first thing I'll mention is I don't know who are these people who have extra time to learn to pick up guitar and who are who are knitting. It's funny that you see on social media, I have all this extra time. Church leaders, that is not us. That is not our reality, and that's okay. I put out a poll on Twitter a couple of days ago and said, hey, who here is working more or less in relationship to this? Because I see a lot of people who are presumably working less, which is great for them. And majority, 80% of the people got back and said, I'm working more in this reality. So look, acknowledge that. First of all, it's not just you. There's other people in the same boat who are working more than you. And then the thing that I encourage other leaders who are struggling is you may be working twice as much with half the results, and that's okay. So in other words, you might be doing more than what you did before, but you might not be seeing as much fruit because there's a learning curve to what you're doing. I'm working more just to figure out how to stream this thing, how to set up Zoom calls and do small groups this way, how to step up my giving online because it was pretty pitiful in the past. And I'm working more, but my results are less. That's okay. That's for a season. That's okay. And for church leaders who are listening to this, take comfort in that may be a short-term window in which you're at. Hopefully that learning curve grows. You get better and faster and see results, but you may be there, you may have been there, or you may still be there. That's okay. And then the second thing is for me, you have to grieve what you lost. You have to grieve what has gone. Before you can hold on to what's new, you need to let go what has gone away. And this, for me, a wake-up call was with my daughter. My wife and I were talking, and we got the email from the school that said officially the rest of the year is canceled at our physical buildings, and it's just online. And we were just talking together as a spouse. What does this mean for us? How do we continue to homeschool for the rest of the year? And my daughter in second grade overheard us talking, and she just burst out in tears and wept. And she said, "Really? I can't see my friends?" And we had to comfort her. And as I was comforting her, I started to weep. I started to weep for her, but I started to weep for my reality. There's a lot of things that I have not grieved yet appropriately, and I have not given up yet. Because of that, I haven't been able to grab the new things God wants for me. So for the church leaders who are listening, if you haven't had that time to mourn, to truly let go of the past or the past things that currently aren't here, do that. Because you can't hold on to the new until you let go of the old. Those are some encouragements I would give to church leaders during this season to make sure they're in a position to care for themselves and for others.
Such a good word. I know, I remember back in 1997, my dad died, and it took me 7 years to grieve. Grieving is a tough, long process, and it takes longer when you don't realize you need to grieve, which was my issue. And I watch a lot of YouTube as far as churches and worship. And on the weekends, we'll watch several church services from around the country, around the world. And just the other day, I love Jeremy Riddle. He's one of my favorite worship leaders. And I saw there was a new Jeremy Riddle video of him in Austria, I believe, leading live worship. And he was singing, and I could hear the crowd singing with him. And it wasn't, I guess it wasn't a recent, during COVID video, but a pre-COVID video that they had just released and edited. But you could hear the crowd singing, and there was something in my gut that was like, I missed that. Because, these last 4 weeks I've been watching online, in my home, and watching various services, my church as well as other churches, but I haven't heard the congregation singing. I haven't heard the people throughout the room singing. And I posted on Facebook the other day, in my Time Hop app came up from 7 years ago, a picture of my parking team standing out in the parking lot with their vests and their umbrellas, and it was snowing and raining and cold. This is when I was in Missouri, and I just thought, oh man, I do miss meeting together. When this, like you and others, when this happened, I kicked into help gear. As a coach and a consultant, I started putting out resources and linking to resources and writing and linking to posts that other people, friends and peers have written, and trying to tell people, here's what you do, here's what you do, here's what you do, here's how you get it done, and just going into straight up help mode. Just like back when my dad died in 1997, I was worried about my brother and my sister and my mom, and I didn't take time to think about me. I remember driving to my mom's house after I got the call that my dad died, and I told my best friend who was with me, go check on my brother. I told my wife, go check on my sister, and I'll go check on my mom. And I kicked into minister mode and pastor mode, and it was, let's everybody check on everybody except me. And so in this heat of the moment, I think I personally have been so fixed on, let's help people get up and going, and let's build these resources, and for those that are on the other side that are receiving the resources and getting the online giving up and going and the online streaming up and going, we haven't necessarily taken that time to just sit there, like you see all throughout Scripture and the Psalms and in the Old Testament, and just have a time of mourning and grieving of, wow, this is and the thing that I was telling a close friend recently, I said, there's some articles I'd like to write that I haven't written yet because I don't know what God is up to yet. I've been trying to really, really think through, what is God doing to his church in this season, and what is it that we're supposed to be learning and taking away from this, and shifting and changing, and what will church look like in the new normal? And I don't have the answers yet, so I've just been sitting back thinking and reflecting. But I like that you talked about the thought of grieving.
There's a couple of extra, like that's from a very mental standpoint and an emotional one. There's a couple of very concrete boundaries and simple boundaries that I didn't really have in place, that this pandemic made me aware that I needed to get in place for myself and for my teams. I think it'd be helpful for the church leaders who are listening. Just three basic stuff is one, just have it, like we said at the onset, have a scheduled day off for everybody. So that's not, I think I'd say we hit the nail on the head with choosing Saturday for our staff, because there's a lot of our staff are still working on Sunday in terms of managing the experience, troubleshooting when it goes down, chat hosting. And so there's a lot of staff that are still working on a Sunday morning in terms of the experiences that we're giving for people. But we've chosen Saturday to say that's just everybody's day off. And if we couldn't get stuff done from Sunday to Friday, then that's okay. That work will get done the next week. But we're at least going to give ourselves one day off and do it organizationally. So we all know, unless it's an emergency, I shouldn't contact you and you shouldn't contact me. And let's be honest, it's really, it's from your senior pastor or your lead pastor, your lead team. This is for them, right? Other people in the organization are going to be taking days off. It's usually the leadership team that's the most driven on this. So take a scheduled day off and make sure everybody knows what it is. The other thing for me, I'm really bad at this, but in the evenings, when it's like off hours, when people are having their meals or settling to get ready for bed, if you want to communicate with them, email and don't text. Email is very passive. If somebody opens up their email, that's the decision they make. That's something they choose to do at 10 o'clock at night if they want to. But if you text somebody, that's pretty invasive, because we all get the notifications, we all hear the chimes, and we feel a degree of responsibility to that because we see it and we can't avoid it. So when it's off hours, don't text people, because at that point, you're really invading their space that they need to recharge and refuel. And then the last thing for myself is just to make sure to to be gracious for people. My wife and I are blessed to both still have our jobs, to be parenting kids as two parents, to haven't had anybody we directly know to get sick or to die from the virus. That's a lot of positive things in our on our side right now. With all those positive things, this has still been hard for us. There are a lot of people who do not have all of those positive things. Maybe might not even have any of those. How are you being gracious to those staff members that might not be in that same boat that you're in? Are you being as gracious for them? Especially, I think about single parents who are still trying to work and have had homeschooling thrown on them at the same time during this pandemic. Are you being gracious for their scenario? If not, give them the same grace that God has given you and the same grace that you would want if you're in their situation. Those are some like really practical new best practices that I've had to apply. I would love to hear if you've applied any new ones as well during the season.
Yeah. Well, as I was telling you off camera, I've been sick the last 4 weeks, so I kind of had to stay down and out, and couldn't really do a whole lot besides looking at Facebook on my phone and sharing resources and linking to stuff. But I feel like I had the wind knocked out of me, and so I've just been resting and quarantined. But so is there anything else you can think of before we go to caring for others as far as self-care? I want to talk a little bit about caring for those in our care and making sure our volunteers don't get burned out, which is an ongoing topic in ministry, everyday ministry, regular ministry pre-COVID. We always talked about how to keep our volunteers from being burned out. But anything else on the self-care aspect that you want to add?
No, other than the fact that what you're alluding to, this self-care gets you into a healthier position to get yourself back in the position to care for others, right? God's blessed us to be a blessing to others. And so how do we allow that blessing of God to influence and recharge our batteries so that we can bless others as well? For us, we're having to think through that pivot where we've done a decent job of caring for the physical needs in our community and caring for those. But we're now seeing the rises in suicide, rises and domestic abuse cases going up as well, mental issues at home with people suffering from anxiety and stress. And we're having to think through critically, how do we address these needs? What does it look like to provide additional pastoral support via Zoom conversations with people? So we're not just taking care of their physical bodies with food and toilet paper or whatever it might be during this crisis, but their spiritual and their mental state as well. What does that look like? I don't have any answers. I just know that we're starting to ask that question. And if a church leader hasn't started to ask that question, to get yourself in that position to do that, because there is going to be a big response to this from the mental state and the mental perspective that people are struggling. And we're just starting to see some of those lead indicators, but there's going to be a lot of lag indicators as well. And so how are you repositioning your staff to do this and your volunteers to be able to do this, to care for people mentally as well?
Yeah, that's good. It is tragic to see the suicide rates going up and domestic violence and abuse going up. So when I think about our teams and our volunteers, I have a friend, Laura Spence Howe, who does some mental health resources, and she posted an article that I shared in my Facebook group, the Weekend Worship and Guest Services Facebook group, on burnout. And I want to just get right to her definition. She said, so what is burnout? To put it simply, burnout is comprised of three components: 1, hopelessness; 2, helplessness; and 3, high levels of prolonged stress. And she defines it like hopelessness, or the thought that nothing is ever going to change; helplessness, or feeling that you have no control of your own circumstance; and then high levels of stress. She shared that very important scripture from Matthew 11:28, "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest." And she said rest is important, but equally as important is learning to identify when people are weary and need rest. So this makes me think of lead pastors overseeing their staff, executive pastors overseeing their staff, directors, ministry directors overseeing their staff, and volunteers, and all of us in ministry that oversee volunteers. She said to prevent burnout with our volunteer teams so that they can remain healthy and have longevity in ministry, we need to consider those three areas. Prevent hopelessness through providing times of rest and clearly communicating vision and direction for the team. Avoid helplessness through providing opportunities for input into the work that people are doing and creating a culture of healthy boundaries with permissions of saying no. That's a big one. And then manage stress by recognizing when work is hard and validating its impacts and allowing people to work in areas that they are gifted and called to. It's not just about recruiting warm bodies. What are your thoughts on people working in their sweet spot? Saddleback has that shape resource when you look at your spiritual gifts. And are we as leaders, I think it's at all times, pre-COVID or during COVID or post-COVID, to talk about not just recruiting warm bodies, but how do we get people to thrive in their sweet spots?
Yeah, you mentioned that shape, that spiritual assessment. So if you haven't done that with your volunteer base, or you have some type of spiritual assessment tool, definitely find one. There's a lot of good ones that are out there to make that available, so you're not just throwing darts in the dark, but you're helping people find that. Also, I always continue with that dartboard analogy. You're not going to hit that bullseye the first time, and that's okay. But as you continue to exercise your spiritual gifts, keep on throwing it, and you'll get closer and closer over time. So you may start off in student ministry and realize that that is not your gift mix, but that's fine. Continue to move on to additional opportunities to serve so that you can. And then from a leadership perspective, I encourage leaders to have easy on ramps so people can serve. There's not so many hoops that they need to jump through to be able to serve on a team. You have to be a member, you have to be baptized, you have to, have given, attended for the past 10 years. That's hard for people to exercise their spiritual gifts. But then an off ramp. Oftentimes we as leaders will manipulate people to stay in an area of ministry that they're not comfortable with, or they're not gifted at, that God has not designed them to be, because we feel we need that warm body, and we don't give them an easy off ramp. We manipulate them to continue to serve. Well, if you don't serve, who will? And this is going to shut down. That's not the best way to utilize people in their gift mix in relationship to that. So those are some ways to do that for your volunteer staff as they continue to move. The other thing I would say for this, Greg, we haven't touched on this, but soul care for the we talk about volunteers, but going back to the leaders, I know I'm guilty of this as well. But a lot of people in the past, we used to look at the church down the street, right? And we used to covet or maybe be envious of what they had, what they did, how successful they were. And that was a struggle before. Now that everybody's online and we're all looking to see what's happening on Sunday morning, that's just ramped up. That's on steroids. And so that if you struggled with any type of covetous heart or envious heart or jealous heart, I would say really watch that. Where I know myself, our church is excise, and whoever, there's always someone bigger. And now you see them. You don't see this church across the street. You see the church across the nation. And guard your heart. You look for them for great ideas of how to innovate, but also realize God's called you to be you, and don't try to be them. Because that again, that's another core issue and driver for burnout, is always striving to being something God has not called you to be. So be who he's called you to be.
Right. And I think of that ex-pastor survey, unrealistic expectations. If you're trying to function like a church of 5,000 and you're a church of 500, you're going to always beat your head up against the wall. Lastly, as we wrap up, I want to keep this to about half an hour for people watching online. But for those church leaders that are like yourself, that are in executive leadership, whether you be a lead pastor, an executive pastor, or on the executive team, lead team, senior leadership, and you have ministry staff that report to you. You have paid, part-time, full-time, and interns and staff that report to you, that are under you. How do you lead and care for them so that they, in this time right now, as we may say, hey, we need this to happen immediately in these COVID days, and they're running and scrambling and reporting to people like yourself and others in senior leadership. How do we protect those that are under our care as far as staff?
Yeah, allow them to say no. You may be in a position where they cannot accomplish what you're wanting to do. We have some of our team members who, videographers, and they're saying, you want me to go out and to record and to put myself in harm's way? Well, I'm living with someone who's immune deficient, and sorry, no. And as a leader, you need to say, that makes sense. I hear you. That's reasonable. That's rational. Let's see if there's another way we can leverage your skill sets during this season. So oftentimes leaders do not accept no. We need to accept no when appropriate, and then figure a way to say yes in a different framework or a different placing. So do that with your staff, and so that they know they can come to you with those no's, instead of just themselves being panicked and anxious in the background. And then let them know what the future looks like. You might not have a complete roadmap of what the future looks like, but everyone needs vision and needs to know where you're going. So as your leader, care for where they are right now and let them know of where you're going to go, so that they understand, okay, so we anticipate we're going to be opening up in 2 to 3 months, whatever that timeline is. And these are the protective next steps we're taking to make sure it's a safe environment for our guests, for our volunteers, for our staffs. This is where we're going. Speak into it. What have we missed? Tell me where my blind spots are. Am I just my hubris saying we're opening tomorrow? Allow your staff to speak into that. Give them a voice into this plan as well. Tell them what your roadmap is and let them speak into it and craft that so you get to the best destination. Though a big source of hope for me is possibility. And if I see what that possibility is going to look like, that light towards the end of the tunnel, and I'm allowed to speak into that, that gives me hope. Give your staff that hope. They might need it. You might be a little embarrassed, right? I don't have the full roadmap. I can't roll it out yet. That's okay. Roll out what you have as soon as you have it, so you can dispense those morsels of hope throughout this process, instead of waiting for 3 months down the road when you have the official plan ready to go. Start doing that now. Start depositing those aspects of hope into your staff.
That's good. Ben, thank you for doing this, man. Thank you for your pastor's heart, your shepherd's heart. Thank you for your friendship, and thank you for these posts that you keep sharing on Facebook. I just shared one in my Facebook group of tips that you gave people for online hosts, and we'll be doing some other stuff in the future. But thank you for sharing today, man, and wish you guys well in Miami. Stay safe, stay well, and keep leading, keep blazing a trail.
Awesome. Thanks for having me here, Greg.